Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into the JB Arts YouTube channel. Today we've got some watercolor pencil crayon for you. Gonna be awesome. If you've never done anything in watercolor before, maybe you want to go take a look at one of our earlier videos on sort of simple watercolor. There's sort of one lesson one and one demo one. So you can go watch that and come back to this one, or you can just jump right into this one and see how it goes. Watercolor pencil crayons are fairly forgiving. They're actually sort of sticks of watercolor wrapped around wood. I've heard of people sort of dipping them in water and then using them right from there. It's a good way to drop a lot of pigment quickly, but you'll burn through your pencils in no time. So what I found to work sort of the best, especially for a beginner, is to lay in your color with the pencil crayons and then add your water after. Now the biggest problem with doing this type of technique is that if you apply too much water, all your colors just end up bleeding together. So what we want to do is work on our piece in sort of patches, or work with one color at a time. Keep our mixing at the beginning to sort of a minimal, and we just keep going piece by piece. In some ways it's a little distracting, or it looks almost puzzle-ish because it's working in pieces. But the more you end up doing, the more the picture starts to come together as a whole. All right, so let's go into a couple of sort of coloring kind of techniques here. So you might notice that I am laying down the pencil to use the side of the color, and that way we're not getting sharp points all the time. If you hold the pencil sort of at a 90-degree angle to your paper, so straight up and down, you find yourself almost like inscribing the paper. You find yourself working on the sharp edge. Again, laying your pencil down, laying the color in softly will give you better blends. And what you want to try to do first, as a beginner, as I recommend, is to try and get a one color gradient first. All right, so laying down your pencil, blending in the color from a white to a much richer color. And as you get good at that, start layering in seconds or third colors. So that way you can get, if you're putting in a yellow, you can get it go from white to a nice sort of soft yellow to a bright yellow. And then you can always mix a bit of orange to get those really nice gradients. Yeah. You can sort of see them in the petals of my Birds of Paradise here, where I've tried to get a variety or a gradient of sort of yellow to oranges to reds. And you can see it in sort of the greens or yellows, greens, and blues, where the colors sort of mix or mend in together quite nicely. Once you've laid in some color, try and add a bit of water to it and see what you've got. You might notice the color changes drastically from what it looks like in a pencil crayon form because of the concentrated pigment. When you add water to it, it suddenly brightens up, it flows around. That can help to sort of accentuate your gradients and such. You can even pull that color out to an area that has no color. You can pull some of that color out again if you find there's too much, either with like a piece of Kleenex, or your paintbrush dry will just absorb that extra moisture and bring it back to more of a whiter paper. So play around with that. Again, in areas that you don't want your colors to blend, be very careful of that. So for examples, you see in the Birds of Paradise, we have our orange petals, and then there's sort of the blue stem pieces. Well, if my orange mixes in with my blue, I'm going to get a really muddy brown color. So I want to make sure that my orange is completely dry before I move on to my blue. So it makes sense that I work on it little bit at a time. So doing all of the orange in color and then adding your water to activate the color, to brighten it up, to work on your gradients, to bring up sort of that richness. Let it dry, then move on to the blue, so your colors don't end up bleeding together and not getting the color that you actually want. Okay, so I hope that helps. Moving on to other tips. Now I did sort of let these dry in between, and just to give you an idea, we've got two different pictures going on here, and it took me about 2 hours-ish per picture. The Birds of Paradise, having a much more involved background, ended up taking, just that bit longer kind of thing. Alright, so we've talked a little bit about applying the color. We've talked a little bit about adding the water and sort of working in stages. So let's talk about getting your colors to sort of meet nicely. You can see in the background here where I'm working that I'm kind of doing sections where they're actually spaced out. The grass blades don't touch sort of other grass blades, and I make sure that the color goes right to the next color. And I actually let the birds of paradise dry before applying this next layer. So you might actually work in stages. Most watercolor artists work in several sheets at one time. They'll actually lay out 3 or 4 sheets and work on them so they can let that color dry and still stay productive. And again, by layering out your colors spaced out, they won't interact with other colors to sort of make them muddy. I want the birds of paradise to be sort of bright and stand out. So technically speaking, if I make the background considerably darker, the foreground of the birds of paradise will just jump right off the page. It'll pop out, it'll look brighter. So working with sort of a black background or really dark greens and things like that will make the birds of paradise jump off the page. You can do that in yours too. Even if the background isn't that dark, you can always darken it for that effect. So as I start to get into the details or the nitty-gritty in between all of the grass blades, the petals of the flower, you'll notice I'm sort of choking the pencil more. I'm holding it closer to the tip. I'm standing the pencil up, and that gives me the sharper edge of the pencil that allows me to get into the little details and hard, fine lines. You want to make sure this background really pops. Sometimes we can get what I call the halo effect, where we're a little bit nervous to get really close to our colors because we don't want them to blend together. So we end up leaving this funny white space around everything. Me personally, I'm not a big fan of that, but as we're learning in things, learning how the colors sort of interact with each other when we add water, how far do they spread out, learning about the life that the watercolor has on its own, you want to make sure that we can get our colors tighter and tighter together, and that will really make your picture pop. Again, the dark background, tidying it up, getting rid of all of those white halo effects can make a big difference to the look. So you'll notice as I'm trying to fill in areas, I'm actually going back over them a second time. And that is a really good point to watercolor pencil crayon, is once it's dry, you can go back and layer in color after color after color and color to build up on that richness rather than just trying to achieve it all at once. The pencil crayons themselves don't work very well on wet paper, so making sure that they're dry. Sometimes. So more about blending colors. As I try and darken my background, I actually add some blue and purples and things like that to make the black look even darker. Adding a bit of color into those areas can help. You'll notice that I am sort of working all over the page still as other areas dry and I work on the background. Then I can come back and sort of pencil in the birds of paradise when it's dry and just sort of keep working back and forth as I go. I did forget to mention that you notice that there's masking tape on my picture. You'll see at the end that it gives it a really nice clean border. It sort of protects the paper in those areas. You want to be very careful about peeling off the tape so you don't rip your paper. Never remove the tape while the paper is still wet or you'll definitely rip it. It could even peel some of your painting up. And then those areas never look the same when you try and fix them or repaint them. Once you have all of your base colors in, it is a good idea to sort of back over it and create shadows or different gradients as I was talking about earlier. You can see here in the blades of grass in the background that I want them to look more three-dimensional. I'm adding a bit of a blue shadow to them, and I'm not too careful on the black side. I kind of want the blue to fade away into the black a bit and then have the strong sort of highlight tucked behind the birds of paradise. And that also helps to make it look like it pops out at us. Now the giant leaf in the background, I want it to be a little bit more grayed out. So I used green and orange, and then I've gone back over it with some blue. You'll see here up close that I'm going back over it again with black. So with those sort of 4 colors all coming together, your eye, technically gets a little bit confused. So it sees it out as more of like a grayed out kind of green. Whatever color has the most saturation of will sort of appear as that color, and then everything else just kind of makes it muddy. We don't always want the brightest colors all the time. We want some areas to be sort of subdued or more natural or earthy. You can see where I've ripped the tape. I didn't want it sort of a regular straight border. I wanted it to be more what's called like a deckled edge, or sort of a torn handmade kind of look. You can see in the sketch I'm keeping it as simple as possible. I want to rely on my painting more. I'm painting the background first on this one rather than going with all of our brighter colors. A really good tip when you're starting painting is one of 3 things. Start with your largest area first, or your brightest colors, because the brighter colors can be covered over easily from darker colors, especially in watercolor. It's very hard to put yellow on top of purple. It just will never show up. So if you do all your yellows first, then they're sort of there, they're protected, you don't forget about them. The third one would be the things that are the furthest away in the painting. So backgrounds, skies, suns, things like that. In our case, I wanted to do the background first, foremost to show you that you can do it either way. There is no right or wrong to these sort of things. There's some guidelines, but there's not a whole lot of dead fast rules when it comes to pencil crayoning. So yes, starting with my background first on this one, just to spice it up, but also because it's the largest area, and the bottom half is sort of a bright color, and I wanted to sort of have my picture stand out. There we go. A close-up shot of sort of how the watercolor changes when you apply the water to it. It gets a lot brighter. The colors blend together nicely. Here I'm actually leaving it sort of streaky, so it's a little bit more explosive coming out from behind. It being a non-sort of descript kind of background, we can do whatever we want to it to make it the picture more dramatic. So having it darker around the perimeter and a brighter green behind the pinky flower, and having sort of streaks that match the petals sort of coming out tries to make the painting look a little more explosive. And you can see in this one, now that I'm getting into the flower, I'm just trying to get my one base pink. Now the kit doesn't actually come with a purple, and I had to cheat a little bit on this one here to get that sort of magenta type purple. I can only get it so far by mixing the 2 colors that I have. The real difficulty is that the red is a little bit more to the orangey side, and that bit of orange in with the blue trying to make purple kind of gave me a gray every time I added a bit of water to it. I could get a decent layer with just the pencil crayon if I left it, but the second I added water and it darkened, it kept going gray on me. Sometimes we really do need a couple of extra pencils to get just that color that we wanted. So I went to sort of the class sets that I've got upstairs and sort of pulled out one magenta pencil crayon to sort of brighten it up a bit more as we got closer to the end. Using more quality materials, if you decide that this is something that you really like, you can upgrade your pencil crayons, and the better pencil crayons will lay down the material just a bit more smoothly. They'll also be more than likely brighter in color. They'll have more intensity when you can lay out that color more smoothly. They'll spread a little bit nicer, as well as the pigments will be more light fast. That means that they'll be more permanent in sunlight. So something that if you're doing watercolors and you want them to last, you're starting to get into better paper, you're really liking the work that you do, the next step would be sort of upgrading a couple of the pencils that you find yourself using all the time, or that one color you just don't have. Maybe those next purchases will be into the next level or quality of pencils. So here's where I've started adding more of the magenta type color, and you can see right away that the color, this is a Staedtler pencil, it's a better quality ones than sort of that's in the kit. Color's a little bit richer. Again, it spreads nicely, and it's just that color that I sort of needed. Now the lighting was a bit different between the two images, so I don't see on the left side the pinky part coming out as much. It's coming out as more blue, where the other one on the right is a little bit more true to the color, to the original, and or the way that I see it when I colored it in. This particular flower, to just try and get the right amount of blends of colors, I ended up doing several layers on just to try and bring it up. At one point I was thinking I was putting on sort of too much, and that's valid as well. Sometimes we can overwork these things. However, they're all a good learning experience. I really enjoyed both of my flowers. The more you do of these kind of things, the better you get. So keep going at it. Enjoy what you do. Make sure you're having fun. Always dress for a mess. Thanks for watching the JB Arts YouTube channel. Have a great day.